All right, I see people starting to join our webinar. Good morning to everyone who's joining us. Just give us a few minutes here to get some folks settled in. Number of people excited about this webinar, so we can't wait to get started. So just bear with us for a couple of minutes while we let some folks into the meeting room.
Don, it's always really great to be with educators who have a real interest in professional learning and how to really advance that work. So really appreciate being able to see people starting to join and connect in, and excited that we're going to be able to have this conversation today, and sure hope people, as they pop in and they already have questions, they could start putting those into the chat so that we know what's on their minds.
That is a great idea.
That would be great.
So those of you who are joining us, if you heard Pam in your little panel there, you can pop in questions into the chat for us. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. So please send us your notes.
All right, Becky, a little water here.
Yep, that was my last coffee sip.
So Don, it's starting to get a little bit chillier in Illinois. When we were there in October, we saw it go from in the 70s to in the 40s overnight. It was just this transformation.
In the last 5 years or so, we have this really interesting thing that we don't know on Halloween if it will snow or not. And yes, I don't ever remember that ever happening when I was a child here growing up in Chicago, but it is now a thing. And it was snowing and quite frigid on Halloween this year. So, yeah. But yet it's going to be 50 degrees on Sunday. So very interesting.
One of the things that I'm always interested in as people start to join is, where are people right now in terms of their geographic location? And if people are in different kinds of school districts, it's really great for you to be able to add in, you know, are you more rural or urban or suburban, or what's your role, and just those kinds of things that help us to have a sense of who we are out there in terms of both us as well as you as audience.
For sure. So use that chat box on your panel for our attendees, our guests. And I think got a nice little group starting to form here. I think we can get started if that's okay with both of you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Well, again, welcome to our webinar put on by Inside Advance, how to create a coaching program that works. Our webinar today features two amazing educators who I have the pleasure to know. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Don Roscigno. I run Inside Advance, and we focus on helping educators with their professional learning, their professional growth, primarily with using video as a great tool to help with instructional coaching. You see my Twitter handle there. Love to share ideas and answer questions from educators using Twitter. But it is my pleasure to really introduce our two guests, who I'm going to embarrass now with all their accolades. First and foremost is Pam Moran, who is currently Executive Director of the Virginia School Consortium for Learning. Pam was also Virginia's 2016 Superintendent of the Year and one of 4 finalists for National Superintendent of the Year that year. She also serves on the Maker Education Board of Directors. She advises both the Future Ready Initiative for the Alliance for Excellent Education, and shout out to Tom Murray, and the American Institute of Architects Education Committee. She served with Aspen's Institute for National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. She was a gubernatorial appointee to the Virginia State Council on Higher Ed. In 2018, she co-authored Timeless Learning, How Imagination, Observation, and Zero-Based Thinking Change Schools. And as superintendent in Albemarle County from 2005 to 2018, her district became one of the top performing school districts in the state, and was ranked in the top 2% of districts nationwide. So I'm not going to say much because Pam knows way more than I do. Also, welcome and wonderful to have Becky Ellis with us. Becky is currently Innovations Project Director with EDU 21C. She also partners with school district administrators and teacher leaders to reimagine and reshape schools to better serve students' needs now and in the future. She taught secondary English and social studies classes and served as both a technology and instructional coach in Albemarle County Public Schools in Virginia. Education is a passion and a second career. So if you've read the ebook, you know this already. Becky spent 20 years as a technology and environmental lawyer before switching to the classroom. And one of the favorite things that Becky shared with us is that she wants everyone to know that the teaching profession is much more difficult than practicing law. Amen.
That is very true.
And I can't wait to hear some more about why. So again, thank you both for joining us.
God, it's great to be with you today. Thank you.
Wonderful. If you haven't had a chance to download this ebook, I just want to give you a real quick run through of what it's all about and what it covers. We've had a load of people interested in this ebook, rightfully so. Fantastic insights and resources, great research cited throughout. But here are the different areas that it focuses on: essential ingredients that create critical impact, making cases for the best kinds of coaching models that are going to have the most impact and what those impact considerations should be, questions you should be thinking about throughout as you investigate the kind of program that you want to create, and then just some real quick tips and what you want to do. How do you start this? And how do you really become that leader that's going to make this change? If you want to download it now, you can go to the Insight Advance website, insightadvance.com/resources, where we have a few other wonderful ebooks for you, but it's also there in your panel. If you click on handouts there in your meeting panel, you should see the PDF is right there for you. So highly recommend that you download it if you haven't already. So Becky and Pam, as we get started here, I sort of wanted to just set some context for this conversation and why this is so important. And a couple of things really struck me that you wrote about in this ebook. So I'd like to start there. This is coming directly from your words in the ebook. I won't read all this word for word, but the problem here is that teachers don't feel supported, and that you're citing here that teachers who don't receive mentoring and other types of coaching and support, they leave at more than twice the rate of those who are supported. But the other problem is that it's maybe not just new teachers who don't feel supported, it's the veteran teachers as well. And that's, a real shocking thing. We all talk about this teacher shortage issue lately, but turnover contributes to our national teacher shortage. Is roughly 60% of teachers hired every year are replacing those who are leaving the classroom before retirement. So I'm just going to pause there for a second and see if there's anything you want to add there.
I would just add, Don, that I think that Becky's an interesting example of someone who left the legal profession as a career switcher to come into education, describes it, as you said earlier, Becky, that it's much harder work than working in law. But most importantly, one of the things that's interesting to me is that you stayed, and you could have become one of those new teachers that left, or you could have become an experienced teacher who left the profession of education behind to go back to law, but you didn't do that. You've stayed in a place of education the whole time. And I know that there's a reason why.
Yes, there is. The reason that I was able to be successful was largely because I had a mentor teacher assigned to me who was phenomenal. Albemarle didn't have a coaching program, a formal instructional coaching program that was connected to novice teachers when I joined the county. They had a mentor teacher system, but it was very, very similar. They did a lot of the same things. And I was in a school that was very traditional. I'm not a very traditional educator. And so she was my mentor was extremely helpful in helping me navigate that situation, and also just all of the things that come up as a new teacher, you know, not knowing where the copiers are, trying to navigate the politics in a school. So it was critical to have that support.
Very good. Another piece that really struck me from what you wrote here, if I can advance my slide, here we go, is the actual financial impact of this. I know it's not something that people want to talk about, but it is one of those harsh realities. There is a true financial impact about this sort of issue. So the research shows that urban districts can spend more than $20,000 on the expenses related to recruiting them, to hiring teachers, and to training them. But the research is also showing that it has a negative impact on our students, and that's why we're all in this in the first place. So you cited some great research from Stanford showing that the increase in turnover is negatively impacting students in their math achievement, and also it had a negative impact in the a stronger impact there were low achieving and Black students as well. So, you know, these are things that really sort of, for me, come together and have us talk about this issue, which is it's pretty simple, that educators just don't get the support that they really want or that they need and deserve. And, you know, yes, there are financial impacts and it makes people's jobs harder, but at the end of the day, it's the students who are really hurting. So I think that's why this conversation and what you've put together in this ebook and what you'll contribute to today's conversation, Pam and Becky, why it's so critically important.
Don, one comment that I would make is that there are a few news outlets in the country that have not covered the recent release of the 2018 PISA data. And whether you agree with the relevance or the even reliability of that data, one of the points that was made in 2017 is that typically over and over again, and there's been research that PISA's done to look at almost what you might call the happiness quotient of teachers in different countries. And what they have found is that the happier, more satisfied that teachers are, the greater that they feel supported. And it's not just financial or just time, but it's really a package that includes the kind of support that allows teachers to engage in professional growth and development. That those countries that have those kinds of programs in place are the ones that tend to be the most high performing in PISA data. And so, you know, you have to ask the question, when you look at the data in the United States, and Gallup has just come out with a research study where they say that teachers in the United States actually report a high level and even active, not just lack of engagement, but active disengagement. And one of the things that they talk about over and over again is exactly what's on this slide, and that is that teachers need to feel and actually experience the kind of support, and it's a variety of different ways, but one of them really is in the area we're going to talk about today, which is coaching and mentoring, that gives teachers a sense that what they do matters.
Well, and I think what is the sort of logical next step in that conversation is, with a mentor, there has to be a relationship that's built on trust. So Becky, maybe you could talk about what's really the role of trust and building a culture of trust. What's that role and importance in a school district as they're embarking on building an instructional coaching program?
I think it's fundamental. If you don't have trust as the foundation, your program is going to fail. It's as simple as that. You have to be ready, and we as coaches knew, especially at the beginning of the year or when we were new coaches assigned to new schools, that a lot of our upfront time would just be spent building those relationships, right? And simple things that were not directly in our job description, right? You go, you help someone with a copier, or you take their class for a few minutes, you sit in the back and give some encouragement without the trust there just is no way to be effective as a coach. You can't partner with someone in something as close to the bone as their instructional beliefs and practice unless you've got that sense of trust. And I think part of that also for people who are considering starting up a program is to keep evaluation out of it initially. That's just my personal view.
And I think it's when we started our coaching model, and it was around 2009, right in the height of the Great Recession of this decade, this past decade. And one of the things that we really tried to take are what are the lessons learned from other districts or divisions in Virginia or districts across the country. And one of them is that when you mix coaching with teacher evaluation, that trust is hard to build because people feel like that making themselves vulnerable, which a teacher has to do in the coaching relationship, becomes something that puts them at risk in terms of evaluation. So we set out from the very beginning to say that our coaching model was not going to put principals and coaches in the room as partners with teachers on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, it was critical to my work as a coach that in Albemarle there was actually a wall between administrators and coaches that were in the classrooms. So we had a hierarchical system. There were lead coaches who would work with administrators in different areas, but as far as individualized teacher professional development and coaching, we didn't deal with the administrators. We were centrally managed, and this is critical. It was confidential, and now everyone knew that up front, and we adhered to it.
Excellent. I hope we can get to the place where evaluations eventually get to the point where they've evolved to where they resemble a coaching cycle a little bit more, and that's probably a whole different webinar unto itself.
Yeah. Well, when you start to go down the work of people that study internal, external motivation, there's no doubt that the feedback cycle is absolutely critical and helps to build internal motivation towards change. But when you put external factors into place, such as evaluation, you can really close down the capability of people to feel motivated to make the changes they need to make, and to be able to do that in a way that allows them to be vulnerable about things that aren't working.
Excellent. So why don't we get started here with a piece that comes directly from the ebook. I'm going to actually, so we make sure that everyone can see things, I'm going to click off my camera, but I'm going to pop up here what you shared in the ebook about the essential ingredients for coaching. And why don't the two of you just sort of take us through these different items, and I will bring them up here so that we have them all up. And these come from Jenny Margera. So why don't you guys take us through these?
Yeah, that sounds great. Becky, when we started building this, you really felt that number one was something that you experienced directly as a coach. I wonder if you might share a little bit about your insights into teacher mindset and or skill set.
I think this was partially based on my experience starting off in coaching as a technology coach. So I was dealing much more with narrow skill developments with programs, software, whatever. But what you notice very quickly is that you can teach a teacher how to perform a specific skill, use a program, but if they don't have a mindset of sort of reflection and growth, and really are focused on very student-centered in their thinking, then the skills are not, you can teach them, forever, and the skills are not going to get you or get them where they would like to be. I think teachers need time to reflect. mean, when you ask a teacher, what do you want? You hear respect, time, more money, right? And having that that luxury of time to reflect with a colleague and sort of examine your practice and grow and be intentional about that growth is critical. I think it's at the center of what coaching can do.
And I think about it, Becky, through you worked as a coach on the technology side, not just on the sort of general instructional practices side of the work. And one of the things that you and I talked about a little bit is that if a teacher needed to learn how to use, let's say they wanted to learn how to use Flipgrid, and you go in and you teach that, but if they are doing that, and maybe it's because of some external pressures versus saying, I really want to be able to use technology in powerful ways to help kids be more involved in their own assessment or sharing their own learning. And so it becomes a mindset of how do I use not just this tool, but lots of tools to really power up kids as learners and not just as screen sheets for the purposes of practicing basic skills on a computer. That you really saw as a coach that people sometimes would start in one place just thinking, oh, I need to learn this skill, but actually would start to shift when they saw the impact on kids of using a tool that powers up kids.
I have a great example of that. A teacher I worked with initially on screencasting, who back when the flipped classroom first sort of became a thing, people were trying to use that and sort of be the cool kid on the block with the screencasting and flipping your classroom and having kids do work outside of the school setting. As we worked through that, as she used that in her class, she realized that there was an equity component that she was completely overlooking, which is that a lot of her kids, well, a fair amount of her kids were rural and had sketchy internet access. Also, some of her kids, home situations, we can't know what's there. So asking them to do this kind of work at home was not maybe the best use of screencasting as a tool in her classroom, but because she had that growth mindset and had learned the skill, we were able to come up with a way for her to use it for kids with writing. And they could work on their revisions and screencast their revisions, which streamlined some of her conferencing during the day. So it is really an example of sort of getting how the mindset should drive skill development and use, and how so many things, equity and other critical components play into that.
Well, and I would think that leads us to number two, and that is that if figuring out more pathways to create access to high quality, interesting, challenging learning experiences for all kids, and not to have those reserved to some kids based on different factors of demographics, then you've got to be able to start to align the way that people think about the work they're doing at the coaching level. So if developing a platform of equity is a system goal, then having a teacher start to think about things such as, if I give these kinds of assignments and kids don't have access in their homes to internet or to the technology they need, then basically I'm creating an inequitable situation that's incompatible with the system goal that we try to level the playing field in terms of being able to support all kids to have really great user experiences. And so, I think that that's a really critical one, and we've talked about that one of the things that's really important with coaching, that when a division or district, we call them divisions in Virginia for those of you who are from out of state.
It's going to sound weird to everyone else.
Yeah, it does. But for folks that are in districts that either have a coaching model or they're thinking about implementing a coaching model, one of the most critical things that you have to think about up front is, what's your end in mind? For us, we provided a lot of autonomy to teachers to develop the areas of focus based on where they were in terms of their experience and practice. And so, a teacher that was, if we were trying to implement project-based learning, We had teachers that were real experts in that. We had teachers that were integrating it really well into their practice. And we had people that were just starting out and maybe weren't even ready to go with PBL yet. And so one of the things that our coaches have to be able to do is to say, how do we help differentiate the way we interface and interact and provide support to teachers based on where teachers are, that teachers know more than kids or one size fits all learners. And so that differentiation is important. We provided a lot of autonomy. There are models that provide less autonomy that are very focused on what you might consider to be seriously urgent areas of focus. So if literacy is an intense focus in a district, in some cases you may have a district that says our coaching model needs to be 150% about literacy. And if somebody's really good at it, they still are going to need to work on literacy. In our system, we would say if you've got somebody that has great expertise in literacy and they want to work on social emotional learning interface in classrooms, then they might spend more time working on that. And because we didn't see the literacy as being the critical goal for them. So I think that's one of the really critical things is people do need to know what the system's goals are and how the coaching model fits into those goals and what your end in mind is. So that, and then I think, Becky, talking about what set you up for success as a coach and what do you think are the essential elements that any coaching model probably has to have in place if coaches are going to feel like that they're really making a difference, that their efficacy matters.
So we're on number 3.
Yeah.
So, setting a coach up for success. Wow, there's so many things. I think first and foremost is what all teachers need, coaches need as well, and that is a clear sense of purpose and continuing professional development. Your coaches, if you have a large group, they need to norm their practice. There needs to be consistency and support for them. One of the strongest supports that you can give as a system to your coaches is to have them controlled from the central office. I know I've got friends who work in systems that have a different arrangement where coaching is very heavily site-based. And just personally, I find that, I was assigned to schools, right? In Albemarle, the way that it was done was we would be assigned to multiple schools, but we were controlled from the division level. So we had division guidelines and support and presence, and we're not embedded in a school so that our time could be used, because we know what happens in schools, right? Things come up and you might be asked to cover someone's class or whatever. And so to keep us very focused on what we were doing, that central control was essential. I also think the design of Albemarle's coaching program was really brilliant because it put up a wall between administrators and coaches at the classroom level. Our coaching system was tiered. So there were lots of us at the classroom level working with teachers. We also had lead coaches who were more instructional specialists and would be the liaison. They would manage a group of coaches in the schools and then were the liaisons to administration, keeping us apart very visibly from administration. Kept that evaluative aspect out of what we were doing. And you can't coach successfully without the trust, and you can't build the trust if your partner thinks that you're in there to evaluate them. So I think those are the things that pop to mind immediately. Pam, have I missed anything?
No, but I think that one of your really good points is about the fact that we set up our coaching model to be a coaching system, and that we saw it as truly a coaching team, a coaching PLC, and not coaches working in isolation. Too often when you have site-based coaching where a coach reports to a principal, the fidelity to a model of coaching can start to get lost pretty quickly. And we had actually seen that because we had had a few math coaches prior to putting in place our general instructional coaching model. And what we were finding is that people were being co-opted to enter data. They would spend all day enter data in all kinds of things that were not even appropriate to their jobs as teacher coaches. So when we said, let's do a reboot on the little bit of coaching that we had and build out a systemic coaching model, one of the things that we really did was we looked at the research and identified what are the principles of the best coaching models that are out there. And one of them, quite frankly, became one of our design principles, and that is that we would have division supervision of coaches, but they would be based in buildings. And so our coaches had offices in schools, or they hung out in libraries or teachers' lounges, or wherever teachers were, trying to build that relationship of how can I help you. And so they were out in the buildings all the time, but the model of supervision that we employed was that we would provide central support to our coaches to sustain their fidelity to the reflective practice model that we put in place. And we did a lot of training and have continued to do a tremendous amount of training of coaches before you go in there. The other thing that we did that's a little interesting that not every coaching model does is that we also said that we wanted our coaches to rotate back in the classroom, that within 3 to 5 years after becoming a coach, that you would take a step in a different direction. Most of our people that rotated out of coaching went right back into the classroom, but some of them moved into some other roles. We've got people that are now administrators who started out as instructional coaches. And so one of the things that we felt was pretty important about the coaching model is that we would not let people become embedded for so long that they forgot what it was like to be in the classroom. We felt that that classroom practice step was absolutely critical to being a really outstanding coach, as well as great people skills were two things. But Becky, the PD that we did for coaches wasn't just one shot in the summer. It was PD that was really kind of around the clock during the year as well. You guys would get it.
Yeah, it was deep and very, it was PLC, right? The way a teacher will work with their group. We gathered, especially the novice coaches get intensive training and support. Time to talk to each other, because a novice coach has a lot of the same things going on as a novice teacher. You're sort of worried about whether you're being effective, you're not using your time as efficiently as you will learn to use it. So just having that time and focused communication with other coaches and support from our lead coaches, who are sort of the ones handling or managing that interaction, was critical. I also wanted to speak to your point about having coaches serve only term limits, if you will. That built a lot of trust and credibility with the teachers with whom we worked. They knew that we were teachers first and foremost, and that we were taking time off to help them, but that we would be moving back to a teaching situation. So especially since we were managed from central office, it made us look less central office like and more approachable. I just found that having that up front made a big difference. It also brings people into the coaching position who are interested in teaching, which that's the big point.
Can I just jump in?
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
One moment here. So the good news is that we're getting a load of questions from the folks who are attending, and they're relevant to what you're talking about right now. So if I can, I just want to get one in here. We're also, just so everyone who's attending knows, some folks have already sent in questions that make up some of the content that we're going to go through here. So we're going to get into those questions in just a moment. But one here comes from Lakeisha Washington. Her question is, so we introduce system goals, we have teachers reflect on those goals, and then have teachers
No, no,
identify their individual goals based on the identified system goals? That's her question. Is that how it's done? And then her follow-up is that you stated that you created a wall between the coach and the administrators, and what is an effective way for district leaders to work with those coaches? So again, the first question was, do we introduce system goals, have teachers reflect on them, and then have teachers identify their own individual goals based on those system goals? Why don't we start there?
That's a great question. Hi, Lakeisha. It's great to see you in the chat today, and hope all is well on the West Coast. One of the things that I would just note is that while we were working on building out our coaching model, that was preceded with a lot of work on our teacher evaluation model that at one point in time had just been one of those checklists of you do it or you don't. And we went to a model that built in a self-assessment component that looked at teachers setting goals and focused on where a teacher was in terms of their own self-assessment, driving to some extent the relationship with the principal or assistant principal, whoever they were setting goals with, that they would be able to think deeply using a variety of sources of data that they had at their fingertips to say, this is a goal that I'm going after that fits with a system goal. So if we were working on, and one that in recent years and right now I know is very big in the system that Becky and I are no longer with. Some people say, Pam, you're not a retired superintendent, you're just kind of rewired. But one of the things that we really looked at is culturally responsive focus of how do you become more culturally responsive as a teacher, and building professional development around that, building system goals around that, having teachers think about how does that goal fit with a bigger picture around access and equity and engagement, and making sure that all kids feel that what's happening for them in a classroom is being responsive to their needs and their background experiences and their demographic lives that they live outside of school and bring into school. And so one of the things that I would say is that as that progression would go from the system sees this as a need, the teacher sees how they fit into that need, then the coach is set up to be able to support that. With that, as Becky says, that wall between the teacher and the coach and the administrator, but the coach and the teacher talk about, what do you want to work on this year and how does that fit? So I think that it's absolutely critical that you do have that progression in order to be able to get something that oftentimes in school districts everywhere or in schools is misalignment of the core values and philosophy, vision, mission, and goals of the division or district with the work that teachers are working on in their classrooms with kids. And when you have that misalignment, that's when you get some pretty significant misfires in people understanding, how does my role fit into a bigger picture of work that a district's doing? Becky, I don't know if you might add some perspective on how teachers might bring the goals that they're setting for themselves in the evaluation system into play with coaches, because I know that would happen.
Yeah, so in Albemarle, it was a great way for us to build relationships with classroom teachers. We were available at the beginning of the year when teachers were setting their SMART goals to help them with the creation of those goals. And they were setting goals that were aligned with the school's goals, which were aligned with the division's goals. So you had that continuum and you had a focus initially. So working with them on those goals gave us a good jumping off point to work on equity issues, for example, or other things that were of great importance to our division. So using those goals as a way to both get started with a teacher and then to drive your work with that teacher during the year was how we operated.
And I think that ties with coach. That's okay. I was just going to say that I think that also leads a little bit into making coaching visible, because
Absolutely.
we know that when people have a real sense that coaching matters, and particularly one of the things that we talked about initially a lot is the fact that in many professions, coaching is the norm, not the exception, but that education, particularly K-12, has been a place where people practice the art of the work that they do, the art and science of teaching, more in isolation than almost any other profession that we know of. Becky, I know from your legal background that lawyers consult with each other and coach all the time. Happens in the
Yes.
medical profession. But in education, because of the way that we keep ourselves so isolated because of the structures that were invented across the 20th century, seldom do teachers actually get the opportunity to engage in the kind of reflective practice. So making coaching visible and important and valued is something that leaders have to be able to do, but then they also need to not interfere in the process by setting up teachers to end up in a situation where they feel that the coach is more evaluative than supportive.
Pam, one of
Yeah.
the school districts that our team has had the pleasure of working with, who I think does an exemplary job of making coaching visible, is Superintendent Ken Wallace out of Park Ridge, Illinois, Main Township 207,
Yeah.
along with his team member Jill Giacaris. They just do a fantastic job. Not only are they, making sure, I think it's now for the past 4 years, that every single teacher has a coach. But their communication about it and making sure the community knows about it, as well as everyone on the team and on their staff, that this is we're not in the status quo. We're doing something different. This is our way of doing things, and that coaching is a part of what makes that district so great. I think they do a wonderful job. So I do have to keep us moving along. We do want to get to a poll question just to get a sense of where everyone in our audience, where they're at with their instructional coaching program. So I'm going to launch a quick poll question. And so you can just click in here. So the question is, where are you with your instructional coaching program? Let us know. Just go ahead and make a choice here. Is it exemplary? Is it working fine, but maybe there are a couple of things you want to improve, or maybe you're not happy with it, or as I've heard from some folks, they don't even have an instructional coaching program yet. So go ahead and chime in. We'll give you a minute or two here. And then we'll start to get into some of these other questions that we received in advance. And I see we're getting a few others here live, which is just wonderful. So thank you for participating. It looks like we're getting to it's working fine, but we're looking for ways to improve. Some folks here are not happy with it and they're looking for improvement. So you've definitely come to the right place. So no one's saying it's exemplary at this time, and no one's saying that they don't have an instructional coaching program. So that kind of gives us a sense of who's with us. All right, I'll give you one last second here to get your votes in, and then we're going to move on.
And while people are voting, one of the things that I would say is that I don't think that we would have ever at any point, and we started our intense coaching focus around 2008-9, so it's 10 years in place at this point. I don't think that we would ever have even said along the way that we felt like that we were exemplary, because the more we learned about coaching, the more we realized that there were things that we needed to learn to actually get better at coaching. I will tell you that someone that's had great influence on me in thinking about what it takes to really mentor and coach and lead for people as learners happens to be Brene Brown's work, and her focus around the critical nature of vulnerability in the coaching focus. And particularly, Don, when we turn to some conversation about using video with coaching, I think that vulnerability piece really is a critical conversation point around how to do that well.
Oh, I would point to it, and we can come back to this, but I would point to a wonderful article in Education Week from Peter DeWitt. He was speaking with superintendent in Guilford Public Schools in Connecticut, Paul Freeman, and the whole concept that Paul Freeman put forth was this concept that all the leaders, not just teachers, but all their leaders and coaches have to display confident vulnerability. And so he's starting to use video in that way with his leadership team. So I highly recommend that article. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and we'll move on. It looks like, again, we're a mix of our coaching programs are working fine, but we're looking for improvement, or we're not happy and it definitely needs improvement. Okay, I think I lost my screen here. Here we go. Are you still seeing the screen?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
And Becky, I still don't see your cat.
Well, you've heard my dog already, so lucky you.
Okay.
Apologies, everyone.
All
So
right.
I think we'll probably want to go through these a little bit quicker here, but it says from the first one that we received is that they need help rebooting their coaching program, and they want to know really where's the best place to start here.
Well, and we kind of did that, although I wouldn't describe what we had before we went into our full-blown instructional coaching program as having been a coaching model that was systemic. It was a little more random around our math coaches. But I do think that you have to be able to focus on some critical questions about, is the coaching model that you have in your current state matching the outcomes or the end in mind that you really have for your district? And that really goes back to your system goals. Are you seeing practices shift, support structures shift, over which teachers have control, that actually lead to the end in mind that you're after? So if literacy is an area of focus, is your coaching model helping teachers to get to the place that they need to be in terms of pedagogies, assessment, and even use of curriculum as it relates to coaching? Becky, I think that you probably have some perspective on how do you know that coaching is actually making a difference? How do you know that coaching itself has efficacy as a focus, and how does that add value to the district? And if it's not, where would you go to find out information about why it's not?
So it's hard to evaluate a coaching program effectively. It's a lot of qualitative sort of considerations. The relationships that you're building with the teachers with whom you're working, division goals, progress toward division goals, all of these things are at some level removed from that very core relationship that a coach and a teacher has or have. If it's not, I would say with this question about, how do we reboot, it takes time. So you have to be able to give yourself the luxury of time for these relationships to develop and to grow, and not to expect incredible results from day one, right? You also need to, if it's not working, you need to talk to the teachers and find out why. Talk to the coaches on the ground. What are the obstacles they're facing? There's so many, not knowing enough about what this particular situation is. I mean, it could be problems with communication, top down, or bottom up. It could be problems with administration, interference, teachers not having time, teachers feeling that they're being evaluated.
Not enough coaches, certainly.
Not enough coaches is huge. But that can be mitigated using video and other tools. That's not a barrier to effective coaching. You can have a small coaching force, and in fact, some of the studies show that a smaller coaching force is a more effective force. So I just, without knowing more about, perhaps if the person who asked the question is in the audience, they can elaborate a little bit for us about the particular issue. But
well, I think that the other thing too is that if your coaching model isn't working, that one of the things that should not be a surprise, because if you're spending time getting feedback from principals who obviously get to see the results of coaching in their schools, from teachers who are the direct interface, who are the people who are our users. They are the folks that you're trying to impact. And if they're not having a good user experience, that should not come as a surprise to you if you are doing the kind of data collection, both qualitative and quantitative, that you need to do for any program to determine, is it moving in the direction and helping us move in the direction it needs to go? And if not, why not? And it doesn't mean that you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but if you're working on it as you move along, you can make those adjustments in the way that you navigate a program forward, so that you can let mistakes be small mistakes. But if you wait 3 years before you start to think about what maybe isn't working, at that point it may be at a failure level that causes you to have to scrap it and do a total restart, or even put it aside, which would be very unfortunate, because coaching is the one strategy that's been identified in the research over and over again that's most effective in getting people to actually transfer something that they're learning into practice. Everybody has the experience of going to conferences or workshops or courses where we have a lot of information and strategy and skill thrown at us. And then you go back to the classroom or to your office, and the compelling issues, the urgency of what's sitting on your desk or in your classroom keeps you from actually trying to do anything different that perhaps you've learned. Coaching is what allows you to be able to bring some support as well as some focus to the funds that you invest in professional learning through other models. So one of the things I would just say is that you've got to really figure out what's the root cause if you need to reboot, and what is it that you would do, and how do you know what the effectiveness would be of changes that you may need to make. So you might think that it's not enough staff, but maybe that's not the real problem at all. You got to dig in on that. We actually did 2 years into the program an external evaluation with the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia, and they came back with really good recommendations that both helped us to see some places where we needed to really maybe make some tweaks, or even some shifts in the direction we were going that were bigger, but it also affirmed where we were getting it right. So it's worth the investment to really take a look at the model and see where you can do a reboot that is going to actually address the root cause of the issues that you may have in your current coaching model. And so assessment is formative, but also summative. One of the things that we would do every year is to report out to our board some of the data that we collected from coaches about how many interactions that they were having with teachers, and were those interactions more superficial or deep, such as the teacher that maybe needed a spot reflective moment that might have been a one-time coaching cycle, or somebody that came back over and over again. And the other thing that we started to do was to take a look at, because serving our novice teachers was so important, we wanted to see, is coaching making a difference in our retention of novice teachers? And we did see a relationship evolve, that as our novice teachers became part of the coaching model, that our capability to hold on to those teachers over time and to have them be able to work on the things that were important, that we knew that from our data. So I would say that
that is amazing.
you've got to do it, and it was part of our state of the division report every year to the school board.
We're starting to see that again with some of the districts that we support, even with our video tools, that they're finding that supporting their newer teachers that way, providing that type of mentoring and using a tool like video is driving retention.
Becky,
driving engagement and retention.
Becky, you mentioned yesterday, just Don kicking up video caused my brain to kind of go, oh yeah. You talked about that one of the investments that we made in our coaches was starting to put some tools in their hands that would allow them to capture video and use that as part of the coaching model.
Right. It's an amazingly strong tool. It's a tool that most novice teachers are very familiar with because coming out of ed school, they've been using video in their student teaching and other settings. But it is such a powerful coaching tool. It removes the idea of a coach as uh, anything but a partner in the relationship. If I were in a classroom and a teacher wanted me to observe a group of students for, engagement, and I'm ticking off boxes, in a way, I'm becoming a little bit of an expert in that situation. If I have a camera in the classroom and I can sit down with that teacher and look at what was going on, we're going to see things that neither one of us picked up, because we have the luxury of review. We have the luxury of pausing and looking, and it also takes that. It's just an equalizer. I can't overstate the power of video as a tool. It's transformative in a lot of ways for a program.
Wonderful. I have to keep us moving. I'm going to move on to our next question. The question is, when structuring our program, how should we approach new teachers versus veteran teachers? I know we were starting to touch on this a little bit, but maybe if we could do 5 minutes or so with a bit of a deeper dive.
Well, and I
Yes.
will tell you that when we started our program, one of the things, again, that was part of our design principles is that above all, that we wanted to put coaches with our new and novice teachers. And I think, Becky, that was a minimum of a 2 to 3 year commitment, because once those
Yeah.
relationships got built, most teachers stay with the coaching model as something that's of use and help to them when they see that it makes a difference. But we felt that it was really important because of the data on the percentage of novice teachers that actually leave the classroom. And what most novice teachers point to are the frustrations they have with problems that they do not know how to solve in their classrooms. And that can be management issues with kids. It can be how to implement pedagogies that a district needs. It can be things that are pretty simple to experienced teachers, but can be overwhelming with novices, such as how do you manage all of the assessments that you have to give and the data that you collect and what to do with it. And so that it feels like that whether it's planning instruction, implementing instruction, or assessing the results of your instruction as a teacher with kids, that all of a sudden new teachers start to have tremendous sense that they are overwhelmed with everything that's on their plate. And what we saw the coaches as being able to do is to help our new teachers step back, take a deep breath, realize that we've all been through those feelings, regardless of when we came into the profession, and that we can help with that. And so Becky, I would describe as somebody that didn't just help teachers who were new to the profession in Albemarle, but because of the complexity of some of our own expectations for what we wanted our teachers to do, we also found that our veteran teachers who were first year really relied on coaches as well to help them navigate into the Albemarle way.
Yeah, I would answer this question in new teachers, coaching should be mandatory and structured with the kinds of supports that Pam just elaborated on. Veteran teachers, voluntary at the beginning, opt in and celebrate their successes. That's how you build the trust and the use of a program among teachers who are already feeling probably very more secure in their practice and more committed to staying in the profession. But with the novice teachers, they need more intensive support. We met with our teachers. It was a mandatory meeting once a week for an hour, and a lot of them we met more than that, as just whatever they needed. That was a focus, and we knew it.
Becky, you also had, as a coaching community, really a curriculum that had been built from observations and information and data, both from outside the system with research, but also our own internal assessments of what tend to be the big barriers and hurdles that new teachers have to move through. And I think that you guys actually work from a little bit of a curriculum of how to actually meet the needs of new teachers in a differentiated way.
Right. We had the individual coaching relationships were only a piece of the support that the coaching model provided to novice teachers. So there were also group meetings and things for them that were structured. But our coaching group developed and updated a rich set of resources for all of the coaches to use to help teachers through, the November slump. And to remind them to celebrate their successes. So also classroom management tools, everything that a new teacher struggles with, there was some resource that was there that we could go to. And also we had time as coaches to meet within our cluster, which is the group that was assigned to a particular school, and in our larger group to share problems and problem solve together. So that was critical to our success.
We also really looked at the research on adult learning and where people are, and thought about that. We used a model that focused on that over time that teachers, and this is kind of recursive, that teachers are developing practices, they're implementing and integrating practices in what they do, so it becomes more synchronized with the routines of their work. And then teachers also become real experts at implementation, and they actually start to innovate practices up that you're going after. And obviously a coach can't sit down with a one-size-fits-all approach to veteran teachers, because the teacher that is an expert in this area, and we start to focus on something like project-based learning, may be the teacher who's just at the readiness level on something like that. And so, Becky, one of the things that you guys spend a lot of time focusing on is how do you really differentiate, whether it's the questions or the ways that you would engage with veteran teachers to support them up, whether it was knowing if a teacher wants to work on project-based learning, who could they go visit, what kinds of resources might be helpful to them. I don't know if you have an example of somebody that was a veteran teacher that you would say, this is how I differentiated for this person, maybe a little bit differently than somebody else that's a veteran.
So you did that the same as you would do in your classroom with students, right? We had a lot of veteran teachers who really, especially at the secondary level, everyone's in silos. And we're just really interested in the opportunity to get out and see a different practice model, or to work with grade levels, like high school teachers working with middle school teachers. So you really become, in the veteran teacher setting, a lot of what you do is making those connections happen. And that's a personalization service that really pays off. So we would facilitate teachers visiting other schools. I worked with a group of high school students who actually they had challenges with reading. We paired them with an elementary school, and they were actually reading. The high school students read a book and then helped teach the same book to the elementary school students. They shared resources about, it was the lemonade wars. So they shared resources about, how to make a lemonade stand. It was just very, very specific to the teachers and the class's needs, and just being available to make those connections that they might not have the luxury of making.
The other thing about having coaches who are part of a coaching community or system is that one of the things you always have to focus on is the content side of areas where people feel like that they need coaching. So Becky was an English language arts teacher, but she might find herself working with a math teacher or a science teacher. And if something came up, Becky, around content, you needed to be able to know how to access resources from other coaches who might be a math teacher or a science teacher or one of the lead coaches to help a teacher around a content focus that maybe they were asking for assistance with. And so we wanted our generalists to be able to see themselves as not the expert in everything, but to be able to find the expertise that a teacher needed if they couldn't provide it directly.
Right, right. And also just to point out that the individual teachers with whom we work they're experts, especially the veteran teachers. They've got lots of content. So a lot of times it was simply what they don't have lots of is time. So helping them find ways to streamline their use of and access to important resources was a big part of what we did.
We
This
also
is
had
all
coaches.
extremely helpful. I have to move us on to the next question.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we started to touch on this a little bit, and obviously this is something that I'm not surprised we were asked this question, given that it's Insight Advance that's hosting the webinar. But the question is about experimenting with video. This educator has been experimenting in their district with it, but some of the teachers are nervous. So why, what's the argument behind it? And I would just point people, before you both answer, I would just point people to the amazing work that Harvard University has done in this area. Tom Kane, Miriam Greenberg have done some amazing work and research going back years with the Best Foot Forward project and the study around the impact of the use of video in observations and being able to coach. But Harvard continues to do some amazing work with their Visibly Better efforts, which our founder, Dr. Michael Moody's been involved in, as well as some of the folks that we support with our own tools are part of their advisory board. Just some tremendous research over the years on what the impact of video can be. And I know this is cited a little bit in the ebook as well, but Becky, you've had some experience in bringing video in. And if you could just sort of talk about, again, maybe that trust element and how maybe both the asynchronous and synchronous ways of video and what the benefits can be of using them.
Sure. So some benefits we've already discussed. The video doesn't lie. If you have a teacher who's resistant or just not aware of something that's going on in their classroom, there is no stronger motivator for an educator than seeing the problem on film. It is also an enormous help with scheduling, especially at the secondary level. Coaches getting access to teachers within their classrooms at a specific time. Novice teachers have tons of demands on their time. So I actually, with one of my novice teachers, we did video sessions in the evenings once a week, because she just felt, she was in a school with a lot of meetings demands, and she felt overwhelmed when we tried to work everything in during the day. So it allows for a level of personalization as well. When teachers were nervous about video, I found invariably it was the veteran teachers. Again, the novice teachers are used to this in their practice, and they've grown up with it. So with a veteran teacher, a lot of times if I was in a situation, you need the trust before you begin. But if I was in a situation with a teacher who was reticent about using video, if I was co-teaching or had an opportunity to co-teach and have that teacher film me, and then I was able to sit down with the video and say, look at all these things that I did that, maybe I could have done another way. What do you think? And go through that process of reflection with the teacher before even broaching a video session with that teacher. That was extremely helpful. Also, if you're using video, it should be very clear to them that it is not going to be used in an evaluative sense, that it is something that's private between the coach and the teacher. That takes a lot of the stress out of it. Start small.
That essentially the video belongs to the coach and the teacher, and that the teacher knows this isn't going to show up somewhere. It's not going to become a 20-second Twitter video or
Mhm.
put in front of a group of people.
Right.
Because I think that one of the things that also that teachers are very tuned into in this day and age is just the idea that media can very easily move around the world, and that to be able to use video as a coaching tool means that teachers have to really know that there's going to be that the division or the district and the coach and anybody that might potentially ever come in contact with that video, they have to know exactly what the rules are around it, because you don't want somebody getting surprised by having somebody say, oh, hey, I heard that the coaches all got together for one of their workshops and they showed a clip of your classroom, and have the teacher go, what?
Right.
That right there will kill a relationship. So the privacy piece is really an important part of the work that you have to do as you're building that trust. And if it is going to get used, again, it goes back to that whole piece about different districts build different kinds of coaching models. And if for some reason that a district chose to use video in a different way than that, then teachers need to know exactly what the rules are around the video. But I will tell you that I've been using video going back to the days when we were turning it into to videotape, to VHS tapes. And probably one of the most risky things I ever did was around 1984. I was an associate principal in a middle school, and actually was doing some teaching as part of my job. That back in the days, that was less unusual than it is today, that administrators actually did some teaching work with kids. So I was in a middle school and I was doing teaching. And one of the things that I did was I had video made so that one of the teachers that was in that particular department and I could sit down and I could get coached by that teacher through the use of VHS tapes. And so, I think that image, and particularly moving images inside a classroom, as Becky said earlier, lend itself to people being able to notice what's going on in a classroom very differently than when you are just having a conversation and trying to recollect what occurred. Becky used the example of engagement, that you may notice that when you're watching a video with a teacher, that they'll see a kid that's not attending to what's going on, that they never even realized that kid was kind of checking out of the class. And it causes them to think about, why did that happen? How do I need to tune in? Was it something that maybe is a pattern? So that using video becomes a really important way for people to notice that, which otherwise may not be seen.
It also sets your coaches up for success, because we would talk about having the third thing, right? You want that relationship to be co-equal. If the teacher doesn't see your relationship as a partnership, then a lot of the benefits of coaching are lost. And when you have a video to focus on, that takes the emphasis away from the coach's view of the situation. And quite frankly, coaches are people too, so we have biases and we're going to miss things as well. And so having that video it's a leveler, and it's also for as long as the teacher chooses to maintain it, it's a reference point. You can go back and see things over and over. In each time you do something, you can see something new. So it's a real benefit.
I also would just note that virtual coaching, that, as Becky said, she worked in a system. Our district had 726 square miles, 26 schools. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to not have our coaches spend more time burning up their gas in their car, driving, and having that impact the amount of time they had coaching. So if a coach could use a virtual opportunity, whether it was with Skype or Zoom or GoTo or any of the platforms that are out there today that people can use to be face-to-face, that we encourage using those kinds of tools as part of the suite of tools that coaches could use. And Becky, I think you did some of that. We also, Becky and I, are working with a network of innovative teams across Virginia. And one of the things that we hear over and over and over again, because we built some coaching into that model, is that our small rural divisions that don't have a lot of staff, everybody in central office is wearing multiple hats, they don't have a lot of resources to go set up a full-blown coaching model, that one of the things that they've indicated to us is how much they've appreciated opportunities for team coaching through our coaching model, and some of that, in fact, probably significant opportunities for virtual coaching accompany that model. And so one of the things that I would say is that coaching has the potential virtually to really level the playing field of opportunities for teachers to grow and develop skill sets, because while it may not be as good as being in the room, it's better than not having the opportunity to work with a person who has a high degree of expertise in coaching, knows how to ask good questions, knows how to look at video with you, or to give you feedback, to tag feedback more asynchronously, so that you as a teacher can actually get access to what professionals in other fields take for granted, and our teachers consider it to be a luxury to have. It should be considered to be a basic part of what we do to make the money that we invest in educators actually count for growth and development and affirmation of the great work that they're doing in the classroom.
Oh, that's so well put. I would add to it that it's, it is a tremendous tool, as you both have said, for coaching. But when you think about how a teacher can use video just for herself and use it for self-reflection, first and foremost, start there, watch herself, watch her practice and critique it. That's tremendous. But then the ability to say, okay, just before I'm ready to move on to sharing my video with a coach, I'd really love to share it with another teacher or a mentor teacher who I really respect. You see that saying often on social media that the best PD I receive is the teacher down the hall. Well, sometimes it's not the teacher down the hall, it's the teacher that's several miles away, and you may not get out to have that, to observe that teacher or have that teacher observe you. And video just makes this so much easier. And there's almost no excuse. Pam, you referenced back in the 80s what you were doing and maybe starting with video. You think about how difficult it was to get started back then, and we were working with getting equipment set up and cameras and tripods and is the lighting right, and let's get a microphone set up. And today, speaking for Insight Advance, we've made it super simple. It's an app on your phone, and you can log in, launch it, record your video, and it uploads right into the software, and you're ready to go. You can start your self-reflection. When you're ready, you can share with a coach. There's really no excuse not to get started. And the things that I love to hear are all the different use cases and the impact. We hear a lot of folks using it for new teacher induction. Becky, you made reference to the fact that the newer teachers are used to using it because they've used it in their pre-service days. Well, they get to their first quote unquote real job and they don't have this tool anymore. So it does make sense to put it in place for them. I was referencing the superintendent in Guilford, Connecticut before as well, and the use case that he said is, before I could even bring this to my teachers, I want to make sure that my leadership is comfortable and my coaches are comfortable using video. We have to be able to critique ourselves before we're going to start to coach or critique, those that we're working with. So.
And Don, going back to the beginning days of our coaching model, and as we were building out the design principles, we had an instructional leadership team of teacher leaders that met with me as the superintendent and with the senior instructional staff at the division level. And they helped us form up and supported up and actually became ambassadors for us to get our program of coaching off the ground. So we engaged and involved teachers in the process of actually building the model. The other thing that was really critical that I think that we did is to really see this as being what I call work that we put into our innovation bucket. And when I would have an initiative such as coaching that went into that bucket in my sort of imaginary buckets that I carried around of work all day, one of the things that I would think about is how do I nurture and support and make this a program that doesn't lose the attention of the people that need to help support up its success in terms of implementation. And so that's one of the things that I think is really critical too, is if you're using, whether it's a virtual model or a relationship that you have with a corporate that's involved in a coaching platform, whether it's your homegrown model, no matter how you do it, if you want it to be successful, you have to pay attention to it, and you have to be able to do that formative assessment work along the way so that you know if it's not working. Your teachers feel like that they can tell you that, and they can tell you why, and they can tell you what they need that may cause you to have to sort of reframe the narrative of how that program is going to work. But we do know this over and over again. Professional development researchers have found over and over, going back to Bruce Joyce and Showers, Bruce Joyce and Showers back in the 80s, that the one trigger for transferring practices into the classroom, getting the work through the classroom door that we invest in, is coaching. And when you can tie that to the kind of expertise that really great coaches bring, whether they're virtual or face-to-face, and use video, because it's something that is so contemporarily available today, what you have is the potential to have the investments that you're making in shifting practices or honing practices actually pay off for you as a district. And that includes holding on to the very people that you're investing in recruiting and selecting for jobs, and then hoping that they retain them. And I will tell you that what coaching can do is, regardless of the model that you're using, if it's a good model and it's one that's based in sound research practices, you're going to increase the likelihood that your investments actually stick.
Well, I think that is the perfect place to sort of stop there. I want to thank everybody who's given us these questions and provided this wonderful sort of roadmap for us to have this discussion. There are some key resources here that I want to share. We can certainly tweet these out and email these to the folks who have joined us and registered and who may watch this later. Again, from a video perspective, just the great research and ongoing work that Harvard University's team is doing. Our website, the Inside Advance website, has a load of different resources about using video. You may want to also look into new teacher induction. In the ebook, Pam and Becky point to the SRI study that's mentioned here. Various coaching models for you to look at as well from our partners at Insight Education Group with the Insight Core Framework, and a great resource they have called Coaching for Change. And also, I think there was another ebook, the Mini Readiness Evaluation for Coaching book as well. So we will share some of these other resources with the folks, again, who have registered. But again, if you didn't get in the handout section, you can go to our website and get these other resources like this ebook. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. But more than anything, I want to thank Pam and Becky for your amazing insights here and your experiences that you've been able to share. I think we're going to take all these wonderful ideas and maybe write a new blog post that features the video recap of this session with you both, but also just sort of highlight some of the key areas. So thank you for all the tremendous work that you do every day, and for taking your time to share with our audience today.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thank you, Don. And we will love to continue to interact with people on Twitter. If you want to connect with any of us and share other ideas or answer questions if you have those. So thank you.
Yep, we're
Thanks
there.
again, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.